Good morning, people. It's Tuesday the 27th. Yesterday we were talking about the mountains that God tells us that we need to and are able to move. And he said nothing is impossible to us. So we've been defining what some of these mountains are. And we're into the mountain of disappointment, not with human beings because that's going to happen, but disappointment with God. And yesterday we said, well, are we disappointed with God because he may be a God who doesn't care? Rational thinking says, of course he cares. If he's done all he has, he obviously cares. My problem is not in my head, my problem is in my heart. And when I solve the problem in my head, the problem in my heart goes away. And it needs for us to start thinking rationally about who God is. There's a great verse in Ephesians 1 that it talks about the mystery of the will of God. It's a mystery. We're not actually meant to understand it. But today I want to add to the question yesterday of does God really care? But by asking you today, is God maybe unfair? Because in my experience, I've heard testimonies of people who have been miraculously healed. And I'm thinking, Lord, why did you do it for him and not him? Lord, why is it that child survived the car accident and people are standing up in testimony and saying, God has protected us, and then I have to minister to a family who lost a child in a car accident. And my question is, God, are you fair? Why don't you have a standard policy throughout? And then I'm reminded of the verse that the will of God is a mystery. And then it says this also of the will of God. It says the will of God he does according to his good pleasure. Now that helps me. That creates a rational thinking in my mind. The psalmist in Psalm 73, he ponders this thought as well. And he said, Lord, I'm a believer, I'm a follower of you, I love you. But I have a question, God, why do the wicked prosper? It's not fair. I'm not prospering. And yet when I look around, I see the wicked prospering everywhere. Jesus at the pool of Bethesda would have been confronted with the same thinking. There was one man who'd lay there for many years and not been healed. He waited for the water, but he was a paralytic and he couldn't get into the water when the angel came and stirred the water up. And then Jesus arrives and he walks up to this man and he says, my man, would you like to be healed? Now there's millions, well not millions, but there's certainly a crowd of people at the pool all waiting for the same thing. And Jesus healed one man. And it's quite crazy because the other men would have said, what's so good about him? Why does he get healed and not us? Has God got favorites? Is God unfair? Now that's our subjective thinking speaking. We've told you we're going to be looking at rational thinking. God is indeed fair. Jesus told that parable in John, in wherever it was, I can't remember. He told the parable of the farmer who had some work to be done. So he went out and he called guys at 6 o'clock, then at 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And the guys who came at 6 o'clock in the morning thought, man, we're going to be paid more than the other guys. It's only fair. It's only fair that we've worked more hours. We should be paid the same as them. And at the end of the day, they were all paid the same. And so those men said, well, this isn't fair. This isn't fair. We've worked long and I can identify with those guys. I'd feel exactly the same. And yet Jesus is trying to teach us through what he said about that man. He's a man who called these guys. He said, am I not the owner of the money that was going to pay you? Can I not determine my own will because it belongs to me? And is God just like that? You see, people, if we could see that God really does care for us, that God is not unjust, he's not unfair, he's just God. And his mystery of his will is so apparent, and that according to that verse, Ephesians 1, he does according to his good pleasure. If you have had your prayers answered by God, I celebrate that. That's awesome. But if you haven't had your prayers answered by God, and you look around and you see people who have, I implore you to rationally think that God is not at all unfair. In Isaiah 45, I'll close with this, there's the illustration of the potter and he's got a bunch of clay, and he's got it on the wheel. And Isaiah says how arrogant it would be for the potter to take his clay, and for the clay to say, hey, I don't like what you're making. Can't you make me into something much better than what you're making me? But the potter has the right to make what he wants out of that clay. And it's very arrogant and very superficial of us to think that we can tell God what he can and cannot do. When we submit to this, people, the relief that comes, the joy that floods our souls to know that God indeed cares, that God is not unfair, and in the big picture of life, eternity and heaven, you'll see that to be the truth. Have a great day. See you tomorrow.